Wonderful. So, yes, thank you for coming today to the Complexity Advantage, leading when there are no right answers. Before we begin, we'll come back to some of the answers coming into the chat now. Thank you very much. But a quick introduction to who we are at the OCM. So, founded in Oxford in 1998, the OCM Group has been supporting leaders and organisations for over 25 years through coaching and mentoring. We were, in fact, one of the UK's first accredited coaching providers. So, through the OCM Enable practice for the business, which is the team that you'll be speaking with today, we partner with organisations such as yourselves to strengthen leadership, build healthier teams, and develop a coaching mindset across the business. So, through that, all of our work is about helping people to think more clearly, navigate the complex world that we're now living in, and making a meaningful, sustainable impact. So, we're delighted to have you all with us today. I am the Key Account Director here at the OCM, which means I have the lovely job of partnering with clients and leaders such as yourselves to understand your organisational needs and how we can best support you to get the best out of your people through coaching and mentoring solutions. So before I introduce today's lovely presenters, we have some more questions some more reasons for people being here today. So we've got the opportunity to feel comfortable in not knowing and how to do this well. Thank you, Lucy. That would be brilliant if we can all get there. And here, I'm a coach working with leaders and teams wanting to get more comfortable with helping myself and others hold uncertainty whilst facing real business pressures. Brilliant. So there are a few more in there. Thank you, everyone who has shared. But without further ado, I am delighted to introduce you to your presenters, Diane and Jodie. So I will hand over to you, Diane.
Thank you, Sophie. That's brilliant. And I noticed that some of the themes that were coming through in the chat were around curiosity. I think that's going to be a bit of a theme for us all today, the role of curiosity. Jodie's going to talk a little bit more about our focus and agenda today in a moment. I'm just going to take a moment to introduce myself. I'm Diane, and I'm really here to share some of what I've seen and experienced as a coach and a team coach, but also as a leader. And I've really been driven, I think, for probably the last 35 years of my career. That makes me feel a bit old saying that. By curiosity, by seeking to understand what it is that allows some individuals and some teams and some organizations to really be adaptable, to thrive in change and ambiguity, and others not to do so. And how can we get more of that adaptive capacity for everyone? That's really what drew me to coaching and mentoring in the first place, and it's still the focus of a lot of my work with leadership teams and individuals and with organizations, as it is for the OCM. And before I pass you over to Jodie, actually, let me just take a moment to encourage you as we go along to put any comments or questions that you've got into the chat. There will be a couple of moments during the webinar where we can pause and Sophie will pull some of that out for us. So do use that rather than the Q&A. Thank you. So Jodie, let me pass over to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Diane. And thanks already for the chat. Please do keep that coming because it makes us feel like, you know, you're all with us and we're not alone. And I'm seeing in the chat already lots of things about wanting to feel comfortable and certain. And there's certainly themes that are going to come up today. So delighted that you're all here. So I'm Jodie Ashworth. I'm a Strategic Solutions Director at the OCM. And for over 25 years now, I've been solving business challenges through leadership development that's grounded in applied psychology and behaviour change. And of course, as you would expect, being part of the OCM, I'm also a professional executive coach. So it's really, really good to be with you all today as we explore together why leadership feels tougher than ever and how we can leverage this complexity that we're working with to build adaptive, future-ready leaders. So over the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to be sharing why we believe it's feeling so challenging for many leaders right now and how we can help to work with this complexity rather than fight against it. So we'll be sharing three key practical shifts that can help us as leadership development professionals to use the environments that we're already operating in to really maximise leadership impact. So what really brings most of us here? Complexity and uncertainty. That's not a new topic. I see it reflected in the chat already. We've all been in this work for a long time and we're all feeling it. But maybe what's becoming clearer is that while the world has changed rapidly, the way that we've been approaching leadership development hasn't really kept pace. And so when we were preparing for this webinar, the famous Einstein quote about the definition of insanity just kept popping into my head, the doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. And it does feel a little bit like that at the moment. And it does feel like perhaps we are now at an inflection point, one that's encouraging us all really to take a step back, take a breath, reflect on what's working and what isn't, and then to make some conscious choices to do some things differently. So we will be talking about the importance of sense making and the value of different perspectives in solving challenges later. So I thought perhaps we could start as we mean to go on and ground ourselves in some of that data. Traditional approaches aren't delivering, and you'll be familiar with a lot of these stats. So 88% of organisation of transformations fail to meet their ambitions. 75% of HR leaders have reported that managers are feeling overwhelmed, with nearly as many sharing that leaders are not equipped to lead their changes. With 75% of organisations having recently updated their leadership development plans, it is clear that we are still investing here and we do think it's important, yet the results are still remaining elusive. So ways of working that were successful before are not working as well anymore. And leaders are having to work at pace, with complexity, with constant change and uncertainty. Many we're finding are burnt out, they're overwhelmed, and often finding themselves in a position where they are unable to perform at the pace that they're needed to and sustain it. Well, goodness, right. So I almost feel like I should apologise because it feels a bit of a depressing and stressful way to start a webinar. So we thought, we know the way that our brain works, and we certainly know that we don't do our best thinking when we're feeling quite overwhelmed ourselves. So I thought before we go any further, let's get our creative brains back online by shifting gear for a moment. And I know a lot of you in the chat mentioned curiosity, so let's get ourselves into that space if we can. So I thought I'm going to ask us to take a breath together, and if I may, I'd like to tell you a short story. So this is the story of the clockmaker and the cloud navigator. And, if you feel like it, it's lunchtime for some of us. You're welcome to close your eyes, get a blanket if it's cold, snuggle down, and just listen to this story just for a moment. So once upon a time, in a small town of ticking gears and shining brass, there lived a master clockmaker. He was known far and wide for his precision. Every cog turned just so. Every spring wound perfectly tight. And when something broke, he knew exactly which screw to tighten. For many years, the world ran like his clocks, orderly, predictable, mechanical, and the clockmaker thrived. But then something changed. The skies grew restless. Clouds began to move in strange and shifting patterns, no longer bound by the gears or the rules, and the world became more like a storm than a machine. The clockmaker tried to fix it in the old way, measuring, tightening, controlling. But every time he did, the clouds simply changed shape again. One day, he met a young cloud navigator, someone who didn't try to control the weather, but learned to move with it. She studied the winds, she sensed the shifts, and adjusted her sails as she went. Your tools are beautiful, she told the clockmaker, but the world no longer runs on gears. It drifts on currents. And slowly, the clockmaker began to see that in this new world, precision wasn't enough, adaptability was. So hopefully we're all feeling a little calmer and a bit more curious and ready to think together. And that's the real work of leadership development now, shifting not just what leaders do, but how they think. Yes, of course, we need our clocks and we need great clock makers. But we cannot just build better clock makers, focusing on frameworks and processes, and then expect them to be able to navigate clouds. We need our cloud navigators too, people with a sense of purpose and direction, who are comfortable knowing the route will change and who are able to adapt to that, sense it, respond to it. So let's break that down a little bit more. So if you can imagine for a moment the inside of a clock, it's complicated. There's lots of gears, springs, precise mechanisms. It comes together in a very particular way. And if it should break, an expert can fix it. They can take it apart, they can identify the broken piece, they can replace it, and it will work again, the same way every time. They can also make even bigger clocks, better clocks, more efficient clocks. And this broken clock is a technical challenge. It requires expertise and established solutions, and it can be fixed. And organisationally, we're facing these types of challenges all of the time. For example, implementing a new system, rolling out standardised training, updating a compliance procedure. And technical leadership is about having or finding the right expert, applying that known best practice and executing on that solution. And this is really, really important and very, very necessary work for our organisations. And traditionally, it has been the focus of leadership development. But as we've established, it's not the only type of challenge that we're facing. And so while the clocks are, of course, still ticking and they are still breaking, there are increasingly cloudier skies to navigate. So if you will, let's just take a moment to look at a cloud. It's complex, it's constantly shifting, it's reforming and responding to invisible forces like temperature, wind, pressure. You certainly can't fix a cloud because there's no fixed state to return to. So it's always changing, and also it changes our state as we interact with it. So this constant shifting is different. Working with clouds is akin to an adaptive challenge. The problem itself evolves as you address it. So there's no one right way. There is no one single truth. Both the equal and the opposite can be true at once, and it's never complete. There are dilemmas and tensions to continually manage and hold in the balance. So organisationally, we're facing these types of challenges more of the time, and they might sound like we need to transform our organisational culture, or perhaps really commonly at the moment, increase that feeling of connectedness while we're all working remotely. And these challenges require adaptive leadership. And this is about engaging people in the struggle, being able to experiment, to sit in the discomfort of not knowing, learning from failure and adjusting as we go. It's both a skill set and a mindset that's able to be comfortable with emergence and uncertainty. And they were the themes that were already coming through in the chat as we joined at 12 o'clock. So treating a cloud like a clock leads to frustration. It's stressful, it can cause burnout and a sense of failure. And so this distinction of clouds and clocks is really often missed. And so I think this brings us really nicely now to a question that we've been asking our clients a lot recently, and we'd love you to have a think about too. So how capable are your leaders in distinguishing between these two types of challenge? So have a think about that for the moment. Sophie's just going to pop up a poll. And while we do that, we'll also just check in on any questions or comments and see how we're doing. And I'll just pop the question up here. So have a think about how capable are your leaders in distinguishing between these two challenges. So are they very capable? So they can tell that difference easily. Technical challenge, adaptive challenge. Are they somewhat capable? They've got a general sense, but they're not always sure. Or are they not yet capable? So they may often treat all challenges in the same way and perhaps even just have been too busy to even think about the question at all. So I'll pause there for a moment and check in with Sophie, and I'll just check the chat myself too.
So I don't see any questions yet. We've got about 70% of the group have answered our poll. We've got one question, or maybe a comment, I suppose, from Rebecca. I think they get it when we take a moment to think, but often seek tangible, one-time technical solutions to complex challenges. Thank you, Rebecca.
Rebecca, it's a default. Yes, absolutely. And Diane's going to talk a little bit more about this later, but we just do have this human need to feel in control and feel certain. So it's a very natural place for us to go. And it's also the way, as we've said, that we've tended to help our leaders to develop. So that's a brilliant observation. And hopefully we'll shed a little bit more light on how we can help leaders with that as we continue with the webinar. So I'm wondering, Sophie, if we perhaps end the poll.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you to the 82% who have completed. I'll end that now and share the results.
Wonderful. Right, great. I'm just having a look. So we can see the majority of us are saying our leaders are somewhat capable or not yet capable. So there's a lovely 3% that's very capable. So I would encourage whoever those 3% are, please do share in the chat, because as we've said, we want to sort of borrow everybody's brilliance as we build and learn together. And for the somewhat capable, not yet capable, this is really interesting, because this is a really important and obvious step that we are really noticing is being missed in leadership development, in the way that we're helping our leaders to stand back for a moment and think about how they solve their problems. So let's, on that note, shift our attention now to what we can actually do about this and get grounded in some practice. So we've established when we treat a clock like a broken cloud. No, when we treat a cloud like a broken clock. I didn't think that sounded right then. It's not going to work, but the other way wouldn't either. We can't expert our way out of these adaptive challenges. It's not how they're going to work. So with our clockmaker mindset now, we might be worrying, is this one of those webinars that's going to give us lots of words but not actually offer us any practical help at all? And so I'm hoping we're in a place now that we can agree the challenge of developing future fit leaders is indeed an adaptive one. So let's switch to our navigator mindset and leverage the perspectives of others to create the path forward. So please do join in with us too. And we'd like to share 3 practical shifts based on our experience with our clients that can help us to consider how to develop more cloud navigators without having to totally redesign your leadership approach. So Diane, I'm going to hand over to you to lead us through these shifts and bring them to life.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm loving the comments that people are putting in. They're really kind of spot on. And Judy has been pointing out leadership teams that I meet with and work with are often frustrated, actually, and exhausted. Sometimes organisations feel like a bit like a spin class. There's an awful lot of pedaling going on, but not a huge amount of movement forward. People are working really hard to meet the challenges, but very often they are treating clouds like clocks. And so this first practical shift, is about recognising that. I loved some of the things that you were saying about how pace and the need for quick decision making and getting it off the list, all of those things are driving some of that. And I think that's absolutely right. I think that leaders do also recognise their responsibility to create clarity in the times of great ambiguity. But I think they get muddled between clarity and certainty. And so what they're trying to do basically is create certainty where none can exist. So they're trying to turn their clouds into clocks, really, partly I think because the organisation understands, recognises and knows how to do clockmaking. And at its absolute worst, I've seen cultures where there's a sort of common clock delusion. You've got leaders making it look at least upwards as though the clock is running beautifully, or it's being assembled and just needs some new cogs, or who they're selling a whole new clock that's just going to solve all of the problems. But those real cloud challenges that are there, they're just not being met. So there is that constant spinning and a leaking of energy and hope out of the organisation. So we're all here because we want to know how to help, how to make this better. And our role as coaches, leaders, developers, it's not to turn everybody into cloud navigators, but it is to create an environment in which leaders can recognise clock challenges and cloud challenges. And not only can, but do recognise that. And in which leaders don't feel like they have to create or pretend certainty or have a complete roadmap to success when it's a cloud challenge that they're facing into. So, and the example I think I'd give to make that a little bit more concrete is an organisation that we have worked with who are working on one of those real adaptive challenges culture. They want a more proactive, entrepreneurial, risk-taking culture that moves faster and responds quicker than their traditional culture. But they were treating it like a clock problem. So they were working on structure and process and tools, and they delegated much of that work to experts, to change experts, including external consultants, rather than getting the people who were in the challenge to collaborate around finding ways of solving it. Well, you can imagine that wasn't really having the desired effect. And the constant reworking and spinning back and having another go is just leaving leadership teams feeling overwhelmed. And I started working with the senior leaders. What they really wanted to do was to figure out how do we work better on finding the solution. But what I asked them to do instead was to step back and examine the question, to look at the challenge together. And that's when they had one of those aha moments that are really so rewarding for anybody who's in our kind of work. The question here was about people, about how they felt, how they related, how they communicated, what they believed that success was. And people just aren't clocks. They're not machines. And actually the analogy that worked for that team was, rather than clocks and clouds, was about machines and gardens. They realized that this was not a machine that they were trying to build or tinker with. It was a garden that they were trying to grow. And that if they wanted it to grow in a particular way, yes, they needed to pay attention to the landscaping, but they needed to feed, encourage, prune, train, and above all, observe, see what thrives, what doesn't, and adjust. They needed that clear vision of what the garden should look like, but they also needed the willingness to adapt to what was emerging. And it's that stepping back and looking at the question, checking that we have the right question and we've understood it fully before rushing to solve, that's the key habit that we need to focus on developing in our leaders and in our leadership teams if we want to navigate the clouds. But then once we know we're dealing with the cloud, do we have the capacity to deal with it? And I've said that not every manager or every leader needs to be a cloud navigator. But we do need to have the cloud navigators there to lead the way. Cloud navigators, they can be clockmakers too, but not every leader is going to develop the capacity to think, to have a navigator's mindset. These cloud navigators aren't navigators like your sat nav. We're not talking about people who are shifting between one known way of doing things to another known way of doing things. That's sophisticated clockmaking. These are explorers, experimenters. They test and refine, they involve others. They collaborate to build perspective and understanding, and they're clear about their destination, open-minded and curious. They're willing to take decisions under uncertainty and to pivot when needed. They question their own and others' sense-making. They balance activity and reflection. They have empathy and understanding of the needs of others, and they have real determination to move forward. For those who are familiar with the idea, these are your post-conventional thinkers. They are comfortable in complexity and ambiguity. So how are we going to help our leaders to develop that capacity, to think differently, to be able to hold these dichotomies and these ambiguities comfortably? And I think the first point is that this is not something that you can teach. It's something that you have to have had experiences to develop. You need to have faced into the cloud problems that you can't solve on your own or through expertise, smarts, hard work, effectiveness. And you need to have learnt from those experiences. I'm finding that leaders, particularly those perhaps in technical functions like finance or IT, perhaps even HR sometimes, often haven't had that combination of cloud challenges and the support to reflect and learn from them that we need. So that cloud navigator capacity is built when people can reflect effectively, when they can step back and look at their sense making critically, questioning their own assumptions and their perceptions. And a CFO that I work with really expressed this when she commented, I've never thought about thinking before, and I've assumed that my feelings are logical outcomes of my obviously correct thinking. And I think she was partly joking, obviously, but that's a really nice way of summarizing where people are at a lot of the time. So an important point there, opportunities alone aren't enough. There has to be effective reflection, which for most, if not all leaders, means support. Facing challenges without that kind of support doesn't catalyze their development. It's more likely just to burn them out and depress them. The other point is that navigating cloud challenges effectively isn't about one person. It's not about one leader. It's about collaboration and multiple perspectives. And that requires the skills and the capacities to question effectively and listen to other people, which of course just happens to be key coaching skills. So practically speaking, we need to build those coaching skills in to our leaders and build a culture that encourages that style, that collaborative sense making. We need to build reflection into our team working as well as into individual thinking. Teams need to be able to step back and think about their thinking together. They need to have those open conversations about how they see challenges, how they're making sense of it, not just about what's happened in the past, what's going to happen in the future. Those conversations are often uncomfortable, which is partly why people don't have them. They're the space in which perspectives and beliefs can collide and where that creative conflict can happen. So in order for those conversations to happen, we do also need to focus on building psychological safety in teams. The trust that's at the bottom of that Lencioni 5 dysfunctions triangle, for those of you that have seen that. That needs to be there to enable those conversations to happen in the first place. I'll just give you a quick example of that. An exco that we've been working with, actually in the construction industry. We've done a lot of that work around building skills, paying attention to trust. We'd used the time to think approaches that Nancy Klein and others have developed, and that had worked really well, been very helpful. But what really was an unlock for them was a very simple reflection that they built into their team working, to think about what is happening together, to think about, so what sense are we making of that together before moving to now what? And the first time that we did this with them, boy, they didn't want to spend time on why, on what, and so what. What they wanted to do was now what. But what they realized, and the reason that they keep using this, is that by doing that, not only do they get better decisions, because they've explored the what and the now what together, but they also build more effective commitment to the actions that they're taking. So actually the whole thing just becomes more effective. There's much less circling. So before we look at that third shift, practical shift, I just want to check in with you around how well your organization is currently using the opportunities that you have with individuals and with teams to support developing this capacity to navigate the clouds in your leadership. The opportunities are there, the challenges are definitely there, but how well are they being used? And perhaps, Sophie, have a quick check. Is there anything in the chat that you want to bring our attention to at this point?
Thanks, Diane. So I've just launched the poll, so people can be doing that while we're having a little look here. No questions as such, but some really interesting thoughts around what's required, kind of the context that's required for these things to happen. So Tim spoke about, I think this approach requires a lot of trust and patience, and that companies aren't often good at those. So Diane, what would be your response to that?
I think that's absolutely right. I think it's, Lencioni, I can't even remember how long ago he published the 5 dysfunctions, but it's probably a decade. And yet we're still not really recognizing that if we want to be able to have that creative conflict, if we want this adaptive capacity to be developed, we do have to invest in building trust. We do have to invest in building the capacity to collaborate. So I think that's right. I think, however, that we can overcome it by doing that kind of work in teams. I think there's a lot more leaders who are recognizing it now. I don't know what others would think or what they're seeing, but that would be my instinct.
Thank you. And there's another one also again from Tim, just mentioned that, this might be happening also because clock making feels easy to measure in contrast to cloud navigating. So accountability is greater in that space. So Diane, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, and that's right. I think it's something I would talk about as the great clock delusion. It's great to measure. It's great to measure progress. If you know what your destination is, if you're clear about where you're navigating to, you need to stop every now and then and say, okay, where are we in relation to that destination? But when actually measuring it, the measurement becomes the driver of success rather than making progress towards the destination. That becomes a real problem. There's not a roadmap. There's not an easy roadmap for each of these kind of cloud problems. So yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and something that's quite difficult culturally for a lot of organizations to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's one last one that I think is a big one. So we might want to come back to Alessandra here, but she's just said, how would you build trust with a group of managers and leaders who spent some time with challenges in working together? So top line.
Yeah, it's a big question. I don't think we've got time right now to deal with that. I'd love to talk by the way, to any of you who've got ongoing questions afterwards. Do drop Sophie a line with your email address and we can pick up on it. But yeah, it can be done. It is done. And I think you're seeing a lot of ideas in the chat as well. I've just seen Rebecca put some thoughts in about dialogic practice, which I think is really helpful. So yeah, thank you.
I've entered the poll and I'll just share the results.
Thank you.
So it looks like we've got 64% say not supported enough, 32% adequately supported, and then 4% very well supported.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that's probably what I would have expected to see. I think it's great that there's 4% that are up there very well supported, and I'd love to know what you're doing. It'd be wonderful if you can put in to the chat your 4% to put that in, because it'd be wonderful for us all to share that. Thank you. I think there's always more we can do. There's always more that we can do. So thinking about that, how can we use the opportunities better? I think there is something about providing the right support. We've been talking about how important it is that individuals and leadership teams get that space and that support to really do effective reflection, to spend time thinking about their thinking. So developing that capacity to think like a cloud navigator is partly about experience, but it's largely about what happens to you when you're having those experiences. And if we want people to have the support to make the most of those experiences available to them in the right place and in the right time, I think what that means is developing the availability of coaching and mentoring in organizations. Of course, there's a role for external coaches and mentors, I'm glad to say, but those external coaches and mentors aren't going to be around enough in the organization to be the source of support. It needs to be there, it needs to be built in. And the organization I mentioned earlier, who were using that gardening analogy, recognized that. And what they did was to use our online coaching skills training to give their leaders and their managers the skills, but crucially also the confidence to use a coaching and mentoring approach to really support others. And I think a couple of things have come up in the comments about the pressure of time and the pressure to get things done. It's really hard when you're under that kind of pressure to take a step back and use a kind of more coaching and mentoring approach, helping other people to explore their thinking, when actually you just want to get things done. Only when you've got confidence that that's actually going to be of value and it's actually going to work, and you've got confidence in your own ability to do it, are you going to apply that approach. But when you do start to do it, when leaders start to do it and they see the impact it has, it's also a positive reinforcing cycle. They find it reducing their to-do list. It's reducing the spinning that we were talking about earlier. And it allows everybody to think better together. And then the barriers start to come down. And as we said, this isn't just about the individual and about individual development. Cloud challenges aren't met by individuals. They're met by collaborative teams and networks and communities. So developing that teaming, providing teams and communities with real coaching so that they grow their capacity to think and learn together is a game changer. When your team meetings become spaces in which we reflect and learn together and find our way forward together, then we're really, truly working with the clouds. So I'm just going to take a step back and summarize the 3 shifts of focus, the 3 practical shifts that we're talking about, and we're seeing as most effective to meet the cloud challenges are helping individuals and teams to identify and work with the clouds instead of treating everything like a clock, or even kind of pretending that everything is a clock, and to help individuals and teams to develop the capacity to work with the clouds by making the most of the development opportunities that are there already. And that crucially means building in coaching support and coaching culture. So this isn't about wrapping up all of your leadership and your leadership team development. It's not about saying everything that we're doing is wrong and we need to do something completely different. What it's very much about is about critically examining what development we're providing to leaders and to leadership teams, and to intentionally foster that capacity to distinguish when to navigate the clouds, and the capacity to navigate the clouds. We really need to support the growth of that navigator mindset effectively, and to give people the space to let the cloud navigators that we have lead. So at this point, I think I just want to pass back to Jodie to close up.
Thanks, Diane, and thank you all for, I'm looking this way because I can see all the chat, all of the engagement as we've been going through, some really pertinent points coming through, and I'm loving the idea of stealing with pride. So you are very welcome. That's what we're all here to do, borrow each other's brilliance and steal with pride. So really appreciate, Diane, what you've done there, because you've brought something to life that can often feel very nebulous and hard to actually do something really practical with. And we know when we're responsible for leadership development, we also do have to deliver and think in a way that we can deliver some practical shifts. So what we've talked about here, hopefully you can see you can start to action in both one-to-one leadership conversations as well as at scale. And what really stands out for me when I was listening to Diane today is that idea of this just stopping, reflective learning, and the power of the habit of pause. What problem or challenge are we actually trying to solve? So we go about it in the right way, and recognizing, as we can see in the chat, there's a lot of action for bias. That's often how we're built, and that's often how successful leaders have found themselves in the places that they are, because they've got stuff done. But sometimes actually stopping is going to allow them to go faster later on and be able to pace their team and keep it sustainable too. And it's not only about identifying the type of challenge, but it's also thinking what we can borrow and build on from others, as we're already doing in our webinar community today. So these are muscles that need to be built. They won't develop overnight. And we know as coaches, this is often one of the key roles that we can help our leaders play in order to become really future fit. So on that note, I think we would like to finish with a question really, and ask you to consider what's one action that you can take to help your leaders navigate complexity differently. And if, again, you've been so willing, as you have already, to share that in the chat so others can borrow that brilliance too, that would be fabulous. And I would love to thank you so much for joining us, for your attention, your generous sharing, your lovely comments, your thoughtful questions and reflections. We'd love to continue that conversation, as Diane said. So if there's things that we haven't answered today, please do get in touch. And until then, I look forward to that. I'll hand over to Sophie.
Thank you very much, Jodie. So me again. Thank you very much, everyone. We really appreciate how busy you all are. And so we really are grateful for your time today. And as Jodie mentioned, we would love to hear what you have to think about today's session and continue the conversation. So if anything today resonated with you, or you'd like to learn more about how we could partner with you on anything that you heard today, please do get in touch. You can see my details here if you haven't already been in touch with me. Thank you, everyone, and we will hopefully see you soon.